EPSI presents Knowledge Series.
Five, four, three, two, one.
Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Sanjay Shrivastava and I am Vice Chancellor of Manav Rachna International Institute of Research and Studies and also Managing Director of Manav Rachna Educational Institution. We have 12 schools pan India and you know about our university. And it is my proud privilege to do a brief interactive session with you and to share my observation and to have your views on behalf of EPSI. We are interacting with each other. You know about EPSI, Education Promotion Society of India. It is one of the private institutions where all the private educational institutions are under one roof. And on behalf of their office bearers, a very warm and hearty welcome to you for this particular dialogue, especially on national education policy. Ma'am,
Thank you.
Ma'am, I have few issues, questions, or observation, and then I would love to have your response on those issues. The first and foremost, I have seen very closely that along with our Honorable Education Minister, with UGC Chairman, AICT Chairman, you have addressed to many platforms and talked to many Vice Chancellors, and I was a part of it. Ma'am, I would like to have your views that the national education policy which has been adopted by the government, what is the way forward and how will the government implement it? This is a huge challenge before government, and as AIU, you are doing absolutely top class work. So ma'am, what is your response on this? Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Shrivastava. Thanks for inviting me for this dialogue. It is a very, very important dialogue. And national education policy, as you know, is a very, very forward-looking, innovative, student-centric and democratic policy. And if implemented in letter and spirit, it has the potential of transforming Indian higher education system. But the only issue is that how to implement it effectively. Now, what I would say on this is that the implementation of the policy doesn't depend upon the government only, it depends upon all the stakeholders, primarily the universities. So when you talk of, say, regulatory structure, when you talk of establishment of HACCI or the 4 verticals of HACCI, or maybe allocating 6% of GDP to the education, or establishing NRF, or establishing Academic Bank of Credit, of course, the government has a major role to play. But apart from that, there are many, many recommendations in the national education policy, which are primarily dependent upon the universities. So I feel that universities have to come forward. Rather, I appeal to all the universities that do come forward and start implementing the education policy. For example, if you have to restructure yourself, there's an issue with regard to restructuring of universities. They have to be either research intensive or teaching intensive universities, or they have to be multidisciplinary, or they have to be non-affiliating universities. In everything, they have to be there has to be a lot of input and a lot of action on the part of the universities. They have to identify the disciplines which are to be there. They have to say, even for de-affiliation of colleges, they don't have to wait for the government regulation for it. What they can do is they can be empowering their colleges, they can be identifying good colleges, they can be sort of identifying autonomous colleges with good accreditation rating, and then handhold them to become autonomous, empower them to become autonomous, train their faculty, train their staff to become autonomous, to devise their own curricula, to in sort of use various technological pedagogies which can induce creative thinking, use the tools for continuous assessment and evaluation of students. So there are multiple ways in which the universities can implement the policy, and rather I would say that more than 70% of the recommendations are to be implemented by the universities. So we need a proactive approach on the part of the universities to effectively implement the national education policy.
Thank you, ma'am. The best part of your all responses I have seen in past 5 months or so that you speak out your heart in such a simple English. and we have to be in English mode, especially for this dialogue. Otherwise, I have heard you speaking in Hindi, and you such a lucid speaker that it reaches out to every common human being. Ma'am,
Thank you.
now coming to a little trivial question. You have spent many years being a Fulbright scholar as a university vice chancellor, and you have taken that university to the next level. You have seen and worked very closely in UGC, now in AIU, and I personally believe that you have given a complete paradigm shift to AIU. The kind of dialogic box you have opened and the way most of the vice chancellors are under one roof, and your leadership, your energy, your vision, I salute to you. Now,
Thank
coming back to a little tricky question, you have seen very closely UGC, AICTE. Now, the policy proposes to set up Higher Education Commission of India, what we call as HECI, under which the National Higher Education Regulatory Council would be established. This council would serve as a single regulator for all the elements of higher education, including teaching but excluding medical and legal profession. And as a country, you know that we have Bar Council of India, we have architecture, we have dental council, we have medical council, we have so many councils, and except UGC and AICT, I hardly find them. They come on one platform. So, ma'am, how will you differentiate single regulatory system from UGC and AICT?
Good question, Dr. Srivastav. It is, I think I should go back to the history that why it is being done. And as you know, my parent office has been UGC, and I have spent my life in UGC, something like 30 years in UGC. And in UGC, we used to daily confront many issues in which there was a lot of overlap. And there was lot many gray areas where we didn't know that who will take over. For example, MCA is looked after being already, although MCA is a science subject, it is being looked after by AICT, but BCA is being looked after by UGC. MBA is being looked after by AICT, but BBA we are looking at. So similarly, for when it used to come to appointment of teachers in the Department of Education, whose regulation should apply, UGC or NCT? So like this, there were many areas where a lot of overlapping was there, and there was no clear demarcation that who should be doing what. So, and secondly, if you see world over, there is no body in the world in which regulation as well as funding is done by the same agency. But in India, the regulation as well as funding both were done by UGC. So very rightly in the policy it is indicated that all these functions should be segregated in a manner that there is no overlap, and still there is a holistic approach to sort of regulating the higher education system of the country. Therefore, the policy talks about Higher Education Commission of India and the four verticals. And again, the four verticals are almost mutually exclusive. One is looking after the funding, Higher Education Grant Council. One is looking after the regulation for maintenance of standard, that is National Higher Education Regulatory Council. There is one vertical on NAC, National Accreditation Council, which will not be accrediting itself, but it will be approving the accrediting agencies. Sort of, it will be working like a meta accrediting agency. And fourthly, it will be General Education Council, which will be laying out the graduate attributes on the National Higher Education Qualification Framework. So all these four are separately. And in addition to that, all the professional councils which were there for sort of making the policies for the professional subjects, for drawing the curriculum, for drawing the graduate attributes, they will still be there, but they will be called professional standard setting bodies. And these professional standard setting bodies will be setting standards for practicing that profession, because there are many professions for which the license is required to practice. For example, Bar Council gives a license to practice, Medical Council gives a license to practice, Nursing Council gives. So wherever a license to practice is required, these professional standard setting bodies are there. So I personally feel that this will be a very innovative step to have all of them under one umbrella and still segregating all four of them so that there is no overlapping of roles, and the regulation as well as funding are two separate entities, and which can be done in a sort of a standalone manner, but again having a good coordination by being under one umbrella organization, that is HECI.
Thank you, ma'am, for such a fantastic answer. I would say that yeah, we spent more than 3 decades in UGC, and who knows where it pinches most. But historically speaking, from 68 to 2020, if we talk about our various national education policy, we are so used to various power brackets called Council of Architecture to Bar Council to so NCT, so many other pockets. How this paradigm shift will help our educational institution, and why not MCI and BCI? Why they have been eliminated?
See, MCI and BCI have not been eliminated. Please, I mean, there is a misunderstanding that there is an elimination of medical and legal education. Medical and legal education are still the part of higher education, but just because they have a different ministry, they have a different council, they are having a different way of doing things. Therefore, they are not sort of absorbed into HECI, but they will still remain PSSBs. There are many, many PSSBs. So similarly, they will also be PSSBs, but they will still remain to be the part of higher education system. Law universities, medical universities, rather, the policy says that they all should become multi-faculty universities. So it is not that the law universities or law education or medical education is outside the purview of higher education. They are very much within the purview of higher education. The only thing is that they will be regulated as of now. They will continue to be regulated by a separate council, that is Bar Council, which will be a PSSB, and Medical or National Medical Commission, which will be a PSSB again. So these will be professional standard setting bodies for these subjects, because these are professional subjects.
So much for clarifying this, and purposefully I asked this question because why MCI and BCI are left out and not others. Thank you so much for clarifying this doubt. Now coming back to the next issue, ma'am, the recent approach of Union government on stay in India and stay in India, study in India, stay in India and study in India. And I must place on record that, especially for stay in India and study in India, EPSI, in their own humble way, from past 10 years or so, they have made lots of effort in the country and outside the country. And the team EPSI, they work day and night for this. Now, what would be the roadmap and how we are going to achieve this? What would be your take on this?
See, if you talk in the context of national education policy, I feel that for the first time, policy has laid down a lot of emphasis on the internationalization of higher education. So how it is laying down emphasis? It is by four ways. One, so far, foreign universities are not allowed to operate on Indian soil, but the policy for the first time has agreed that 100 top foreign universities can come and establish campuses on Indian soil. Second, our universities can freely go to the other countries and open their campuses there. Third, the credits earned in the foreign universities, the credits earned in the foreign universities can be transferred and counted for giving a degree in the Indian university. And fourth, the policy also recognizing, especially about the stay in India and study in India, that every university should open an international office, so that whenever a foreign student is coming to the university, they should be dealt with professionally, with care, because they eventually become our brand ambassadors. So therefore, for dealing with them professionally and for taking care of them in all ways, whether it is emotional or physical or academic or psychological, all ways, there should be an international office which takes care of the foreign students. So stay in India, study in India, both can be taken care of if we implement all the four aspects which I have just indicated. For example, when you talk of foreign universities campuses in India, so it will help us in multiple ways. For example, right now something like 7 to 8 lakh students go outside India to study in foreign universities, and as against that, only 46,000 students come to India. Now, these 7 to 8 lakh students have spent something like $2 billion every year on foreign education. So much of foreign exchange is going out of the country. So when these foreign campuses come and set up their foreign universities come and set up their campuses in India, one, the foreign exchange will be the sort of outflow of foreign exchange will be reduced. Second, the cost of living in India is less as compared to cost of living in these countries. Therefore, the burden of studies or the burden of expenditure on these students will also reduce. Third, when we have these foreign universities in India, then right now, if you talk of the inbound students, they mostly come from Afghanistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan. So these students, if they want to go to the USA or UK for studies, and if the campuses of those universities are in India, they will prefer coming to Indian campus of a foreign university rather than going abroad to that particular country. So our inbound students will increase. So stay in India, study in India will be promoted. And also, our universities will have a sense of competition. They will improve themselves, and a lot of collaboration opportunities will be there. And our universities can collaborate with these foreign universities in terms of, say, semester exchange or for teacher exchange or maybe student exchange. So much of collaborative activities can take place with the foreign campuses in India. So I feel the policy very strongly promotes stay in India, study in India by taking all these measures.
Ma'am, do you find that it is going to be such a simple change in the mindset, especially those parents and students who dream to go abroad and pursue their career? Will they really take a different mindset to see that I am not going abroad and stay and study here?
See, COVID has contributed a lot in changing the mindset of the people. So this time when COVID struck, many of our students who were studying in foreign universities, they came back. Many of them came to me also that we want to take admission back in Indian universities. We don't even want to go back. So there's a lot of change in the mindset, and lot of foreign universities right now have undertaken, instead of regular, they are now taking over, going over into the online mode. So when it is online mode, then also they are sitting here and studying in a foreign university. So if they have a full-fledged campus on Indian soil, I think that will be a win-win situation for both, and the Indian students will be benefited in all possible manners.
Now, ma'am, coming back to the next agenda before us about NRF. Now, when we talk about NRF, as per our national education policy, an annual fund of rupees 20,000 crore we have allocated. But in your own eyes and judgment of 3 decades, very closely at UGC, how soon you are expecting this to take off and and also see its action in the universities?
See, as far as I understand, government is very keen to establish National Research Foundation. And for the first time, you must have noticed in the policy that the policy itself very clearly spells out that in India, the expenditure on research is 0.6%, rather 0.67% of GDP, whereas the expenditure in other countries like Israel, it is 4.3% of GDP. So the policy itself admits that we are spending very less on the research activities, and that is why our research is suffering. That is why our publications are not quality publications. That is why our number of publications are also low. So to sort of take care of all these factors, the policy says that yes, the spending on the research would be increased, and I feel that it should immediately go to at least 1%, and in 5 years to come, it should reach to at least 2% of the GDP, the spending on the research. So I personally feel that National Research Foundation will be established soon. Until it is established, whatever research activities were taking place so far, they will continue. There won't be any activity which will be discontinued, like DBT, DST, UGC, whoever was funding for research. They will continue to fund for research. NRF will be an additional thing. It will be a coordinating mechanism. The funding from all these forces will not stop. It will continue. but this will be an additional funding on the part of the government, and I feel government is committed to this when it specifically also says that 6% of GDP will be spent on education, which has been the recommendation since 1964 Kothari Commission, but still it is around 4%, less than 4%. So the government is again committed, has committed itself to spend 6% of GDP on education. So I think NRF will be seeing the light of the day very soon.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much talking about National Research Foundation and especially science, art, social sciences, and various other disciplines or humanities. Now, with coming up of NEP, NRF, they are going to be greatly benefited. Now, ma'am, from NRF, which you have very clearly sorted out, let me move to the next little difficult area, which talks about why Indian universities in general perform poorly in global ranking. And especially, I wish to highlight one parameter. Most of the global ranking organization, they talk about academic reputation and they give academic reputation highest percentage to the tune of 40% or so. Now, why, as Indian universities, we are not able to perform in their list, and how long you foresee that will be there?
See, first and foremost thing that why Indian universities are not figuring in the global rankings. So that is a question which everybody is asking. Either the former president of India had raised it on many occasions in many universities, that why Indian universities are not figuring in global ranking. So I should not say that everything is good with Indian universities, but still they are not figuring. Of course, we need to do a lot to improve our rankings in terms of doing quality publications, because research is a major chunk when they talk about publications. Then the two more issues where we sort of lack in getting the rankings is the number of foreign students and the foreign teachers in university. So that is also an issue. But the reputation which you are talking about, we in AIU held a meeting with the QS people, and we called many of our universities to tell them that why we are not, I mean, we just to discuss that why we are not figuring in the global rankings. So what transpired was the following: was one, when you talk of the reputation survey, who is giving this reputation marks? Who is deciding that whether this university is reputed or not? For that, both QS as well as Times, they have a set of people, set of experts with them who decide whether this is a reputed university or not a reputed university. Now, Indian universities are not very well known, means all the Indian universities are not very well known in foreign countries. And the set of experts they have, they say that we ask from every university that give us a list of, say, 400 academicians and 400 employers who can be judging you. So our universities have not given that database to them so far. I mean, some must have given, but mostly have not given. So the database of experts from whom they are assessing the reputation survey is mostly comprising of foreign people who are not having any knowledge about the Indian universities. The first thing is that we should be improving that. That is how our reputation, we will get more marks in the reputation survey when there are people in that database who know Indian universities. So for that, universities have to contribute. They have to give them the database that these are the people whom you should be asking about the reputation of the country. One is that. Second is that Indian universities, though, do a lot of work, but they are very weak in marketing themselves, in projecting themselves. So even if they have done a lot of work, the work will not be projected because that will be done within the university and the outside world doesn't know about it. So there's a lot of requirement on the part of Indian universities of building their brand. So brand building, image building, projecting themselves even through social medias, that is also very, very important, where we are lacking. Of course, we should improve on basic things like research and foreign students, international students, and diversity. But there are issues with regard to ranking also. Like there are some areas where Indian universities are doing very well, especially say university social responsibility. So whatever efforts our universities are putting into USR, university social responsibility, that is not counted anywhere in the global rankings, because they are not taking that parameter into consideration. So there are issues with regard to both parameters, our brand building, reputation survey, publications, everything, especially publication in the regional languages, which you do not find place in Scopus and all. So there are many issues which have to be addressed slowly.
Clarify the same point which you have just mentioned. When we talk about branding of Indian universities, there are two important aspects. One is branding is what you create or what you communicate. So we are lacking in your understanding, we are lacking on creating front or the communicating front or both.
Both more in the communicating, but then creating also. Both we are lacking, and means we have to do our brand building. Brand building is not only of the commercial organizations, brand building is also of the universities. Harvard is a brand, Stanford is a brand, Oxford, Cambridge, they are brands. So we have to do our brand building also.
So how you have to, what you have to create and how you have to communicate, you think that we Indian universities have to work on both the parameters.
Sure.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Now, moving to few more questions, then we'll close. Now, government set to target a GER of 50% by 2035 in higher education. In your eyes, is it very ambitious or achievable? What would be your first-hand comment on this?
See, I myself did a study which was published in Economic and Political Weekly also. This was on the eligible enrollment ratio. So what I studied in that was that the gross enrollment ratio can increase only when we have sufficient number of people who have passed 12th class. Right now, the completion rate at 12th class is 42%. That is, out of 100, only 42% have passed 12th class. So if we have only 42 people who have passed 12th class, how can we have 50 people who have entered higher education? So therefore, if we have to increase, and if I called it as EER, like GER is the gross enrollment ratio, EER is the eligible enrollment ratio, which is calculated by having the enrollment on the top numerator divided by the number of people in the number of eligible people in the relevant age group. That is the number of persons who have passed 12th class in the age group of 18 to 23. So when we calculate EER, it is around 65 for India. GER is 26, but EER is 65. And we did a study of 10 countries, and we saw that in almost all the developing countries, the gap between GER and EER was huge, whereas in the developed countries, the GER and EER was almost the same. Therefore, if we really want to achieve the higher education GER at 50%, we first have to improve the GER at the school level, because we do not have sufficient pass outs who can enter into higher education. So for entering into higher education, I mean for improving the GER of higher education, the GER of school education has to improve, and that has to improve from 42 to something like 70-75%. Then only we can achieve the 50% GER. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to achieve, because we don't have the threshold level people who can enter into higher education. So till we have that, it cannot be done. And of course, when you talk of accommodating the expansion, means if the number of people are available, then what to do? Obviously, we have to increase the number of universities, increase the number of programs, make every university a large university, which is administration, the national education policy also, and give a lot of emphasis on the quality online ODL programs, because quality is the, and I will underline the word quality, so the quality online programs should be imparted, which can increase the GER and the access to higher education.
Very nice. Ma'am, in fact, I have seen your article of EPW and I really appreciated, especially on the WhatsApp group also, that very good paper and very good study you have mentioned. And it is a comprehensive study, and perhaps many policy level bodies, they have to think about the ER and GR which you talked about, and why we are lacking while rest of the world is doing very well. Now, ma'am, coming to the last few questions, especially we being a private university, Indian universities, if you look at the complete panorama of Indian university, how does the government plan to open higher education to foreign players, and what would be the level playing field for Indian and foreign players?
See that it will be hard to say at this point of time, because obviously the government will be making regulations for entry of foreign universities into India. And I also feel that the regulations have to be quite liberal, because if they are not liberal, the good foreign universities will not come to India. So we have to wait for the government policy and regulation on this field. But the ease of operation in India has to be ensured. Then only the foreign universities will come. We recently, AIU had webinars with, say, Harvard University, MIT, and Chicago. These three universities we had. And every university we asked, are you planning to come to India now that India is open to the foreign universities? Most of them said that right now they do not have any plans, especially, say, Harvard. This says not only India, they don't open their campuses anywhere. So if you have to experience Harvard, come to Harvard. So like this, there may be many universities who may not be readily willing to come, but if we give them an ease of operation, if it becomes lucrative for them, they will certainly come. So we have to draft that regulation or legislation very, very carefully to attract foreign universities to India.
Ma'am, one more clarification, especially for the MPhil program. What impact will be doing away with the MPhil programs we have?
I feel no impact will be there, because MPhil in fact was sort of a redundant degree in the form that whosoever was doing MPhil, they were entering PhD. So MPhil was an intermediary degree. And then earlier UGC used to give exemption from NET for MPhil degree holders. So that exemption was also withdrawn. So with MPhil, the students were not able to gain much, because with PhD they could get net exemption, increments, everything. With only MPhil they were not getting anything. So MPhil seemed to be a redundant degree, and I feel it has rightly been abolished.
Thank you so much. Ma'am, during your 30 years of stay at UGC, you have gone to many universities and colleges, and during your interaction with faculties, often we have heard that they say that we do not have enough freedom to design our own curriculum. We do not have any freedom at all. And now this NEP says that faculty members have complete freedom to design their own curricular within the defined approved framework. Similarly, multidisciplinary universities also will need to have multi-talented teachers. Do you think whatever NEP we are talking about and these two paradigms which I have just mentioned before you, is it feasible?
It is feasible, it is doable, but it is not easy, because when you have to make every university a multi-faculty university, when you have to give a lot of freedom to the students to choose from multiple disciplines, you will require a lot of resources, you will require a lot of faculty, you will require a lot of multi-talented faculty. So of course that will be required. It is not, again I'm saying it is doable, it's not that it's not doable, but of course it requires a lot of resources. And if we invest in resources, if we really want to do it, it can be done. But then again, I say that we all, means universities, colleges, teachers, we all are existing just because of the students. So it is the students whose interest has to be watched. That is why the policy is student centric. It is watching the interest of the students, and therefore all these freedoms, autonomy which the universities have always been asking for has been given. Now the onus lies on the universities that how to use this autonomy, how to use this freedom in the best interest of the teachers as well as the students.
Ma'am, in past 5 months, again I am repeating at the cost of repetition, I have seen that you have organized plenty of webinars. I was also present in the AIU's annual meet. You have done so much. Now, as a Secretary General of AIU, how AIU will contribute in making India a Vishwaguru? What is your thought on this? And I expect an elaborate answer from you.
Okay. See, in AIU, we are doing many things which will help India in becoming a Vishwaguru. I'll narrate one by one. For example, so far in AIU, we were doing everything manually, and the universities, when they had to contact us, they were finding it difficult, and then they were not we wanted to give a lot of value added services to our members. So we have started an AIU portal. AIU portal is giving, say, AIU admission portal, AIU job portal, AIU collaboration portal. So how will it help? For example, in AIU admission portal, we are requesting all the universities that whatever programs you are running, please fill in the AIU portal. So from outside, whether it is an Indian student or a foreign student, if he wants to do a particular program, he writes on the AIU portal and he gets the list of the universities along with their website addresses where he can join for that program. So at one place, he can get the information about each and every program which was not existing so far. Similarly, in AIU job portal, we are requesting all the universities that we will put your jobs on our portal. So if you want to, say, apply for, say, assistant professor in English, and if you write assistant professor in English, on the portal will come the universities where such vacancies are there along with the last date for filling the application. So, and most important of that is AIU collaboration portal. When we talk of AIU collaboration portal, in AIU collaboration portal, what difficulty I used to face when I used to go to foreign countries was that they never used to know which country, which Indian university is good for which subject. Overall ranking they knew from NAC, A grade, A plus grade, or maybe NBA had some engineering technology program wise accreditation. But overall, if you want to, say, collaborate in quantum physics, which university to go to? If you want to collaborate in life sciences or history or economics, which university to go to? That was not available. So we are making a AIU collaboration portal in which we are requesting the universities themselves that fill up, say, 5 best departments of your university where you wish to collaborate along with the credentials. It's not only the listing of the department, it will be along with the credentials in terms of publications, faculty, facilities, past record, performance, everything. So when that is there, it will be very easy for foreign universities to collaborate with us. Secondly, AIU's one of the major activities of AIU is equivalence of degrees. So equivalence of degrees, now we have made it online. Now no offline application is accepted. Everybody has to apply online. And now we are doing it in a record time. I mean, in a minimum possible time, we are giving the equivalence of degrees. And there also we are doing many, many innovations. For example, with regard to internationalization, we are now moving from duration approach to credit approach. Till now, the duration had to match. If master's somewhere is less than 2 years duration, we will not give the equivalence. But now we are saying if the credits are matching, we can give the equivalence. So that type of innovation is there. Then, for promoting internationalization of higher education, what we are planning is to make an Indian network of international higher educators. What will that do? It will be a network of Indian universities who are very good in internationalization and who are not good but who intend to do internationalization. So the issue is that right now, even if a university wants to enter into internationalization, they don't know how to approach, how to go, how to identify a university, with which university to collaborate, which foreign professor to call to the university. So how to do internationalization, they don't know. So through this network, we will sort of do a lot of hand holding so that the universities know whom to approach, how to do internationalization. So that Indian network of international higher educators is on the cards. Then again, capacity building of the teachers. We are talking to some we are trying to outsource this, that if you want to train our teachers and non-teaching staff, like training of educational administrators and training of teachers, especially for example, now online teaching is there, or in new teaching pedagogy is there, or maybe in environment protection is there, or in flipped classroom model is there. So how to train the teachers? So we are trying to partner with some institutions so that at a minimal cost, the capacity building of teachers can be done. So like this, there, I mean, I can go on and on. There are many, many more ways in which we are trying to help the university system. But I am sure in times to come, it will be, AIU will be providing many, many more opportunities, many, many more ways of engaging with our universities.
Thank you, ma'am. I was expecting an elaborate answer and you have given that. Now, this is my last question before you, and I am going beyond my mandate. If we look at the history of AIU, which is almost going to touch 100 years, in these 95 plus years, you are the second woman Secretary General of AIU. And I look at you as a change master who would be redefining the game, especially in the context of Association of Indian Universities. As a person, as a professional, how do you feel and what benchmark you have set for your own self?
See, I just told you what all we planned for AIU. As a person, I feel that AIU is a very good organization where there's a lot of scope of doing a lot of work. There's an open field. You can do so much. You just have to exert, and you can do so much for the benefit of the higher education system. And then it's total autonomous, total independence is there. So I find it very good, and I'm very happy here. And I think I can contribute a lot in furthering the quality of higher education in the country. And we really wish to do a lot.
Ma'am, before I formally say thank you to you, what would be your parting message to all the universities, students, parents, industry, all the stakeholders? What would be your parting message, ma'am?
Parting message with regard to NEP will be that the government has given you a policy which is very, very forward-looking, innovative, very, very transparent policy in which a lot of emphasis has been given on improving the quality, internationalization, creativity, curiosity, continuous assessment and evaluation. So the onus lies on the universities to implement it in letter and spirit. And if the universities implement it in letter and spirit, they will really understand that how India is slowly becoming the Vishwaguru, how India's higher education landscape is transforming. But every student, every teacher, every vice chancellor has to put heart, blood, sweat, everything into it. Then only this policy can really see the light of the day.
Thank you so much, ma'am. On behalf of EPSI, its office bearers and team of EPSI, on my personal behalf, I thank you and
thank you very much. Thank you, and thank you to the EPSI for giving me an opportunity and talk to all of you. Thank you very much.